You're listening to Expedition Wolfdog, a radio show about wolf dogs, for wolf dogs, and the people that love them. I'm your host, George Stapleton. I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode of Expedition Wolfdog.
Hi, everybody. This is George with Expedition Wolfdog. We tonight have a really amazing guest, and a couple people are going to be joining us. So let's get started. Tonight we're talking about wolf dog legalities with Jeremy Cohen, the Boston dog lawyer. Jeremy Cohen, founder of the Boston Dog Lawyers, was co-counsel for the defendant in the matter of Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Ted Anderson, who was accused of owning and harboring 2 illegal wolf dogs. A lawyer for nearly 25 years, Jeremy has been handling cases for dog and pet owners since 2008. On tonight's episode, we will discuss the wolf dog case with Attorney Cohen, who insists that in many states, owners should not be afraid to own their canines legally. Victory took over a year, including a Thanksgiving Day showdown with the environmental police. And Ted still has his pets, Luna and Kino. We're going to hear the basis of the case and the resulting ruling from the attorney that made it happen. And then after that, we're going to open up phone lines, and we're going to ask for people to give us a call and let us know what they think or if they have any questions. So without any further ado, let me bring on Jeremy Cohen, and he is here to explain the basics of the case. Jeremy?
Thank you, George. Great to be here. What you're doing for the wolf dog community is so essential to bring everybody together so we can all work off of the same information. So thank you for the opportunity. When I first got the call from Ted Anderson back in the fall of 2016, my first response was, Ted, I don't deal with wolves. I deal with dogs. And shortly thereafter, and I really did not understand the difference, or that actually there is no difference. So I needed to get educated about that. And when you combine Ted's story with my passion for the very reason I opened this firm, was I don't like bullies, especially when the government is trying to bully people out of their property, out of having their pets. I decided I want to learn about this, and there is no difference in my mind anymore between a dog and a wolf dog, or I have a golden retriever, Ted has a wolf hybrid. We all have dogs, and I came to meet some great experts in the field and people who really know what they're doing, Mace Loftus especially, and Lorraine Smith. And Ted was a great client because he wanted to fight for this. So he had these 2 great dogs, Keanu and Luna and Keanu, and I did go out and meet them. And my sense is that these are dogs who have a certain look, a coveted look among certain people, just the way some people want to collect classic cars. The difference is here, they might have a wolf-type look, but their anatomy, their behavior, it's all dog. Just like you might want to have a classic car, but inside you probably have a modern engine and all the modern amenities that cars have now, but you want that classic look. And I really supported Ted in this. He's a great pet owner. He has an immense pen for these dogs with 8-foot-high fences. They have heated areas to sleep. He gives them some great food, chicken, liver, beef, and they have plenty of room to run around. He's good because he understands his dogs need more containment than my golden retriever does, and he learned about it, and he handles them very safely. Now what I learned, and what your audience already knows, is that one trait these dogs have is because there's some the wolf in them. They're actually kind of timid when it comes to meeting people. Then the Malamute or whatever their crossbred comes out, and you see that they're just a great dog, and they love their bellies rubbed. And I was sold as soon as I met them that I want these dogs to stay with Ted. What happened was someone, or for some reason, the environmental police in Massachusetts got word that Ted might have these unusual-looking dogs. And they came there without Ted's knowledge, and they looked in the pen, or this environmental cop did, and he felt that these were wolf dogs. Now, he's in his late 20s, it's his first year on the job, and he notified Ted that he thought he had a problem, that he was violating the law which prohibits wolf hybrids or wolf dogs in Massachusetts, the way most states prohibit them. And what we learned was the only test, it was just the eye test. This cop didn't do any other type of testing. He certainly didn't do any temperament testing. He, at most, threw in a block of cheese to try to see how they would respond. And we know that the cop did this because Ted doesn't feed his dogs cheese. So there was remnants of a block of cheese. So I already was uncomfortable with the way the police were handling it. And it became clear that they were threatening Ted, that they were going to take these animals if he didn't relocate them. Well, relocating them was not an option because they're Ted's pets, and he's invested in them, time, money, love, and he's not going away without a fight. And what the environmental police tried to convince him of was, we can seize them at any time, and if we take them, you'll never see them again. So you should do this on your own. I had reached out to them and said, that's not how you do it. And everybody has a right to due process. And due process means when the government tries to take your property, you have a right to a fair hearing. And these guys were ignoring it. And for a week went by where they weren't responding to me. It was Thanksgiving Day of 2016 at noon, when everybody would be just about sitting down for their dinner, when they finally reached out to me. The environmental police reached out on Thanksgiving Day and said, Ted has 6 days to get rid of his dogs, or we're coming in and take him, and he will never see them again. I was livid, and I responded right away that now I know how they do things here, that they wanted to do it on Thanksgiving Day and upset my client, upset me, and that's just bullying at its best. They were kind of punishing him for obtaining counsel. So from there, I was able to, with some letters and some threats, keep them from taking the dogs and invited them to hold a hearing as to whether or not Ted was breaking the law. What they did instead was, at least they didn't take the dogs, but they charged him with a criminal violation of the Massachusetts statute that prohibits the keeping of these animals. And it was so obvious to me that they had no idea whether or not these animals were wolf dogs or wolf hybrids, and that there's really no great way to test them either. So I surrounded myself with people smarter than me, including Professor Ray Perotti from Kansas, who educated us about wolf hybrids. And it turned out that their expert for the state, he knew nothing about dogs. He was more of a bird and fish person. And they were relying on him to look at some pictures to determine that these were dogs with high wolf content. That is unacceptable. And, I mean, Ted, the consequences were great. There was fines, there was jail time, plus forfeiture of his animals. So this team of ours, we pressed on, and I'm not certain if Attorney Joe Griffin has been able to get in with us or not. He is.
You want me to bring him in, Jeremy? He actually, I just got him up online. I can see him here. Would you like me to bring him in?
Just a moment. I know I've been talking for 7 straight minutes, but I'm just trying to set the tone for everybody. And
sure.
What ended up happening was, to defend Ted, we had to go to criminal court, and Joe is a criminal defense lawyer. I am a dog and pet lawyer. So we combined and created a team that we're going to take on the state. It was a ton of fun, and we had a great client in Ted, like I said before, because he understood the steps and he was willing to let us just do our job. And we know the result. Ted got to keep his dogs, Luna and Keanu. So Joe Griffin has been a criminal defense attorney for about 20, maybe 24 years. He's been a lifelong friend of mine. And this case gave us a chance to work together, and it was the first of several cases now where there's a pet component and a criminal component where we team up and present our clients. So at this time, it'd be great to hear from Joe Griffin. He's going to walk us through what was wrong with the statute that was controlling here, because the number one thing, regardless of whatever state people are in, the number one place to first look is to the statute and figure out. You need to underline every single word in the statute and understand what that word means and why it's there. As we have the constitutional right as citizens here to know in advance what actions are allowed and what actions are not allowed. And it was under this premise, in looking at some breed-specific legislation cases that struck down breed-specific legislation for reasons that it was simply an eye test to identify what breed of the dog was, and that gave unleashed discretion to police officers. It was with that backdrop that Joe then took the lead in criminal court.
Hi, Joe. Joe Griffin is now joining us. He is co-counsel for this case. Joe, this is George Stapleton. Thank you so much for taking some time. And did you get to hear everything Jeremy said there at the intro?
Good evening. I did. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So
Joe, why don't you bring him through?
Go ahead.
Joe, why don't you bring him through how we started to develop a strategy to take on the state?
Sure. So I remember this case very well, and I've had the pleasure of working with Jeremy a number of times. What we first started with, after Jeremy told me about the case, is we first looked at the statute that we were dealing with, which is this statute in Massachusetts. And I'll spare you the reading it to you, but essentially it says basically you cannot possess a wild canid hybrid or a wild felid hybrid or the offspring of one, or you can't hold out one of your own animals as such. And we looked at that and we thought to ourselves, well, there's not a lot of detail there, and there's not a lot of traction to sort of figure out what you can and cannot own in terms of a particular pet. So we ultimately put together this legal argument that said this statute is what we call void for vagueness, which is to say it doesn't satisfy due process requirements because it's not sufficiently clear enough so as to give notice of the conduct that it prohibits. So, you looking at it through that prism, you are then able to say, look, a citizen of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts should not be required to guess in order to comply with the particular statute, especially in a situation like this where the only way to determine what a particular animal is to look at it. And as a result, there's no comprehensible standard and there's no practice that you can use to define what is and what is not a wild canid or a hybrid wolf canid because it's so ambiguous. And that's also true of the related federal statutes, the Code of Mass Regulations as well. It was all sort of pointing to the same, ambiguity. And the regulatory scheme that existed at the time, it still exists, is that no citizen of the Commonwealth was able to figure out what conduct was prohibited. First of all, you can't determine whether an animal is a wild canid or a hybrid wild canid or a domestic dog or the offspring of one or the other. So that really requires impossible standards because you don't have defined parameters for what you can and cannot constitutionally own. So armed with that, we were able to ultimately argue that, this is so vague that a pet owner would not be able to understand the statute or figure out if the statute intends an animal such as a wolf or a wild canid when owners are not breeding their own dogs but are getting them from places like animal shelters or pet stores or breeders. It's impossible to ascertain whether or not your dog is the offspring of a wild canid or a hybrid. And that was the scenario with Ted. Often people are relying on representations made to them by breeders and veterinarians. And in the case of Mr. Anderson, he had a number of documents that he didn't generate that were provided to him. Dog licenses, animal health certificates, rabies vaccination certificates, if I remember correctly. Jeremy would remember. But all of those, or none of those, I should say, described his animals as a wild canid or a hybrid or anything like that. They were all talking about Luna being a black canine female, shepherd husky, this kind of thing. Even the rabies, as I say, the rabies vaccination certificates. And there's no procedure that the statute identifies directing law enforcement people to use to sort of figure this out. And as I know Jeremy said, what the Commonwealth had to sort of rely on was a visual inspection by someone who, although was very knowledgeable and very educated, didn't have, at least from our perspective, any prior experience with breed identification or with enforcement of this particular statute. And the facts and circumstances under which they made these observations involved going to his house unannounced, going on the property, throwing this block of cheese over, and again, from our perspective, that was a violation of his constitutional rights in and of itself. This idea of what's essentially a warrantless search, taking this action without notice, and that was, I know, something that Jeremy felt very strongly about, and I certainly didn't disagree with him. So we had proof, notwithstanding the statute of what the dogs were, and we could go back, I think it was 30 years or something like that. So, I think ultimately the court agreed with us. I know the court agreed with us that the ordinance was, or the law rather, was unconstitutionally vague because there were no scientific means to determine whether a dog belongs to a particular breed or mixture of a particular breed, and you can't apply conflicting subjective standards to determine which dog is which. So, we had facts that were very, very similar to a case that was in Massachusetts and that we were able to use to ultimately say, look, these vague laws violate due process because they don't limit the exercise of discretion of officials who are trying to essentially enforce statutes arbitrarily and in a discriminatory way. So the dog owner then has to sort of guess what dog look is prohibited and requires proof of a dog's type, which is ultimately impossible to furnish. So, the court agreed with us. They agreed that the statute was void for vagueness, and the Commonwealth, although they opposed the motion, they didn't, if I remember correctly, file a written opposition because I don't think they could have put one together. So, it's sort of an example of, in my career, without sort of crossing paths with Jeremy, it's completely unlikely that I would have ever sort of engaged in this exercise, but I'm very grateful that I did because what happened here was wrong, and I'm very happy that it worked out for Ted.
Speaking of Ted, I see that he just joined. I'm going to bring him in with the three of us, and then we do have callers that are lining up. So, Ted, I'm going to bring you online now. And let's see if I can get you in there. Mr. Anderson, this is George. Can you hear me okay?
Hi, George. How you doing? You could just call me Ted, by the way.
All right, Ted. Thank you. So we've got Jeremy and Joe are online with us, and I don't know if you heard, but we went over the broad strokes of the case and what was they considered unconstitutional. But what I want to do is drill in on something that happened to you on Thanksgiving Day. Would you briefly tell me what it was like to have these people show up at your house to try to take your animals?
Yeah, I believe it was Thanksgiving. The guy, Raymer, his name was Nicholas Raymer. He was the environmental cop for the state of Massachusetts. He showed up and he gave me like a deadline, like 10 days to get the dogs out of the state of Massachusetts, or he was going to seize them. And I guess that meant if he was going to seize them, he was also going to euthanize them. But he was very matter of fact. I mean, there was several times that I tried to convince him to go out and look at the dogs and pet them and all that. He wasn't interested in any of that. he was interested in getting his hands on them and getting rid of them in one way or another. But he tried to present himself as a canine cop. In other words, he tried to present himself as a cop who liked dogs and used dogs for police work. But you know, that's very controversial, using dogs for police work, because you know what happened in the 1960s in Alabama when they cops took those German Shepherds on the civil rights people. I mean, they just chewed them all to hell, you know. And my dogs were a lot. You couldn't train the dogs I had to be police dogs. I mean, they just wouldn't comprehend it. They don't have that kind of psychology.
Right.
And
so this guy Raymer came up, and what did he do? Just like beat on your door until you answered, or walk us through that?
My door. I thought he was beating on my door to the max. I had no idea what was going on. I answered the door, and he was extremely nasty. But he had been with this the state of Massachusetts biologist, French, Dr. Thomas French. They came on my property a few times, and Raymer came on, I don't know how many times. I would say it was at least 4 or 5 times when I wasn't here. And I thought that violated, I think it's Amendment 4, right? That would violate my Amendment 4 rights. You know, he's coming on my property and trying to seize things. They're making observations of my dogs. And this guy, French, I have a PhD in physics, by the way. So when you evaluate somebody in science, you look at their publications, their list of peer-reviewed journal articles or peer-reviewed books or something. But Raymer was boasting because he said this guy French had like 25 years experience with dogs and wolves and all this. And so I decided to look into that, see what kind of publications he had. It turns out he didn't have any publications whatsoever on canines. It was all on mice and birds and squirrels and, you know, animals of the rodent family and bird family. He didn't have any background in dogs whatsoever. No publications on canines. So he didn't even know what he was doing. But
so what did he say? What did he say to you, Ted?
Well, he gave me a deadline. It's like, I think it was like 10 days to get rid of them, or he was going to seize them. And I assume if he's going to seize them, he's going to euthanize them.
Right.
I mean,
or find placement. Right. So then, did you contact Jeremy? And so what I'm interested in is, so you have to understand our listeners, Ted, so our listeners are primarily Wolfdog owners, people just like you, who could have a situation like this happen just like you. So what was your first thing that you did when this started happening? Was it to contact Jeremy? I mean, what did you do?
Yeah, I started looking around for an attorney, and then I found Jeremy, who specialized in representing dog owners. Usually when you find an attorney associated with dogs, they're representing an insurance company representing a bite victim. But he was on the other side of the fence actually protecting dogs and their dog owners. So he was on the other side of the fence. So I contacted him. And then after a few discussions with Mace Luftos, where I got my dogs, Mace had told me about Professor Perotti at the University of Kansas, and that guy is pretty remarkable. I mean, I don't think there's very few people in this world that know as much about dogs as he does. I mean, he knows a lot about wolves, but also just regular dogs. He's an expert on wolves.
Right.
And
our listeners are very familiar with Dr. Perotti and his work. So he helped your defense then with Jeremy and Joe.
Yeah, he did help we went to a hearing, and French was there, and Raymer was there. Raymer was kind of a smart ass. You know, he's a smart ass cop, making all kinds he really made a lot of derogatory remarks when we left, as we were leaving. But the cards were kind of stacked against us for that hearing, because the local this wasn't a judge. This was some kind of a clerk. He listened to us. So it was me, Jeremy, and Ray Perotti on one side of the table, and then French Raymer, the environmental cop, and his boss on the other side of the table. And Raymer started talking about what happened, and then he brought French into the conversation. And you know, they said I had illegal dogs, and they went on and on and on. And they said French was an expert and all this. And finally, Ray got to say his piece, and Ray basically blew French away. I mean, French has a PhD in biology, but Ray has so much more knowledge than he does about dogs and canines. He just intellectually blew him away. But I think that this clerk was I know this clerk from I've heard stuff about this clerk. He's a local clerk that hears cases. He's not a judge, but he basically sides with the authorities and people who have the most power. So he kicked it up. He says, "Well, I think we've learned enough here to kick it up to the next level." I mean, these guys don't care how much money this stuff costs, you know, and And I think that what they try to do is the making you spend money so you give up, you know. So
right.
Anyway,
well, and we see that. Yeah, we see that across the country, Ted. Let me bring Jeremy in here. So Jeremy, when Ted contacted you and you decided on this course of action, I don't want to fast forward too much because I know there's a lot of steps, and I can tell you this: we're probably going to do another show or two out of this. But let's go to the point where we get to you've gone to court, you fought in this battle, you've had the showdown where they come and try to take the dogs. How did you win, Jeremy? Can you take us through that?
Sure. The thing about my firm, about Boston Dog Lawyers, and also about Joe Griffith is, if you beat us, you could only beat us after having gone through a major war with us. You're not going to get anything easy from us. And so initially, it was just through our passion and our anger and our concern for Ted and his rights. And that propelled us to a certain point. And the hearing that Ted's talking about was a probable cause hearing where a clerk would decide if it's more likely than not that a crime was committed. And there was a showdown in that room, and thanks to Ray Perotti, who educated me to poke holes in this biologist, French, because as we learned, and a lot of this was learning for me and for Joe, we had to learn about these dogs. As we now know, they're the same species. Wolves and dogs are the same species. It goes back to the mid-'90s. And French, who was portraying the fact that he understood everything about species, Ray had me ask him the question, is a horse and a donkey, are they the same species? And French said, yes, of course they are. And that just, at that point, Ray and I and Ted were able to just burst out with a little bit of laughter because it was a setup. And clearly French doesn't understand the differences among species because, of course, horses and donkeys are different species. And at that hearing, the goal of that hearing was to set the tone that this is going to be a battle. And probable cause hearings, it's often that they push the case forward to court for an arraignment. But it was understood after that hearing, which took about 2.5 hours, that we weren't going anywhere, and Ted wasn't going anywhere. But it also became clear to me that the path to victory had to involve somebody who had submerged himself in the criminal justice system, and that's bringing in Joe Griffith. I mean, one of the great traits of mine is that I understand there's so many smarter people out there than me, and I had to build this team. And Ted agreeing and Joe agreeing to join the team, we had a lot of confidence, and we didn't know if we had a winning argument, but what a chance to make this type of an argument that the statute is void for vagueness. We just don't get to do that. And we were doing it because...
So Jeremy, let me drill in on something. you wanted to win an argument, and that argument was that the statute that said these animals were illegal in the first place was too vague to be applied to the dogs. Is that what I'm understanding?
Right, because it didn't at all define or make really distinctions between hybrids and domesticated dogs. It just said that any offspring from a wild canid and a hybrid or domesticated canid is considered illegal here. And it's so fortunate, when you put this in front of a judge, in front of a third party, you don't know who you're going to get. But this judge at the first hearing, he said, wait a second, I'm a dog owner. This is important to me. And we pointed out that essentially all dogs have descended from wolves, and the statute didn't make anything clear about how many generations you had to go back. It just said any dog, basically with a wolf in its ancestry. So that the judge took it pretty personal and said, so you're saying that I might have to give up my dog based on the wording of the statute. So super fortunate that we got a judge who was engaged in this. And it's certainly not an argument that he had heard before. So it does. These dog cases do attract some interest from judges who haven't been able to rule on something like this in the past. So that is part of the
Let me ask you a question, Jeremy. So I keep hearing the term, the statute refers to a wild wolf and a domestic dog. Was the judge, did you ever use the argument with the judge that these animals are wolf dog to wolf dog pairings and that there's no wild animal that they've been bred with?
Exactly. In Mace Loftus and Lorraine Smith, they helped educate me on that. And as Joe said, we could go back at least 27 to 30 years, I think eight generations, and we had a little family tree. And it's my understanding, Mace has never, or at least not in decades, ever had a wild wolf on his property or in his possession to create, a wolf hybrid. That as far back as we could go, there was no wild wolf involved here. And so essentially the statute was saying for the last 15 to 40,000 years, whichever you decide is the time frame for domesticating dogs, any dog produced during that time is illegal. And that's how big the statute was. And the argument helped the judge understand that. We boiled it down to a very simple argument that this statute is essentially the statute's illegal. Not what Ted has as dogs, but the statute is, and the judge agreed.
Wow.
Right. This is Ted. I thought we were going to win on biological grounds, but we actually won on legal grounds. Because
which is better for you, Ted, right? I mean, that was better for you and your dogs, wouldn't it be, to win legally as well?
Jeremy and Joe Griffin, poked holes in the law and poked holes big enough in the law that we won. But so even though Ray helped us a lot, Ray Friday, because his knowledge of canines is second to none. He helped us on the biological part, but what ultimately won was Jeremy punching a hole in the law big enough that we won.
So let me ask you, Jeremy, is there now going to be is the law going to be changed in Massachusetts, or is it? I guess now that there's a precedented case, it can be challenged, or no? So
that's an interesting question, and I'll answer it briefly. Then I want to defer to Joe. But when laws change, laws don't necessarily change, but the interpretation of the law changes, and law is based on precedent. So here, the judge certainly set a precedent. The problem is, because we got it on the first hit, it never went up to the appeals court. It never went up to the highest court in Massachusetts, so it wasn't a reported case. So unfortunately, unless people find out about this victory through these types of channels, it's not reported anywhere. So other people could still be going through the same problem and not know that a judge previously ruled in our favor. So it's certainly strong enough that if this case were to come up again, we have some authority now to share with another judge that here's how this person ruled, so there's some precedent there. And Joe can probably explain a little bit better what I mean about going up a couple of levels in the court to get it reported.
Yeah, Joe Griffin here, and Jeremy's exactly right. We got a district court decision from a district court judge, and while it was the right decision, and while it does essentially say the statute is void for vagueness, it's sort of not going to change the statute itself. So the statute still exists as it was written the day that we wrote our memorandum and made the legal argument. It's exactly the same. And Jeremy's right. The trouble is people putting their fingers on that because it's not reported. But, you know, it does have precedential value, although not as much as if it had gone to the Supreme Judicial Court or the Court of Appeals here in Massachusetts. So
okay.
It's, you know,
so
not
let
the
me
kind
ask
of
you
thing
this,
that's...
Joe, let me ask you this. If state, let's just say state A has a similar law to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, would this defense that you guys use be viable if the wording of the law were similar? I mean, I know it's vague in itself. It seems to me that if a state has used similar terms of wild wolf with a domestic dog, that seems like there's a potential challenge there. Or am I misunderstanding?
No, I think you're right, but the key is the word potential. It's certainly the kind of exercise where you have to really, really scrutinize the statute, and you might imagine we spent a lot of time putting this together. So the proof's in the pudding. It really is specific as to what the actual statute says. Every comma has meaning. Every word has significance. So it really depends on what you're looking at.
Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do, guys, I know that there's probably a lot more to discuss about this case, and I definitely want to get into it a little deeper. Unfortunately, we only have an hour. We got about 22 minutes left, and I know we've got people that are lining up to call. Some of the questions may be specific to the case. Some of the questions may be specific to wolf dogs and the legalities. But I'm going to leave all three of you guys on in case any of our callers want to ask you, Ted, or you, Joe, or you, Jeremy, anything specific to this case. But maybe some bigger picture stuff. I am getting some text questions that are coming in. Let me bring on our first caller. Let's see. Hang on one sec. Let's go. Okay, caller, this is George. You're on Expedition Wolfdog. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hey.
Am I on?
Who do we have on the phone? Yes, you're on. Who do we have?
Oh, very good. Hello, George. This is John Grove. I'm calling from Virginia. I am the owner of a company called Lupine Grove. We are gearing up to perform education on wolf dogs. We have been involved with these animals for about 9 years, have volunteered at sanctuaries, have been all over the country, and feel the best way that we can try to help keep wolf dogs out of trouble is to educate people before they buy. A lot of people buy these animals based on the appearance and they don't understand their mind. We want to try to help them understand the mind of a wolf dog so their expectations and the dog can match and everybody will be happy. My question is specific to some of the terminology that you used in the other case, but in Virginia, there is no restriction on wolf dogs. It is the rabies vaccine that's the problem. So the Virginia guidelines for rabies prevention and control from the Virginia Department of Health reference wolf hybrids 2 separate times. The first reference, they're called hybrids. USDA has not labeled any vaccines for use in hybrid animals. That is concerning to me because I don't think USDA will ever develop a vaccine or label a vaccine for use in hybrids, because USDA considers hybrids domestic animals. So right there's a conundrum. There's never going to be, on label for hybrid when USDA considers them domestic. A little later in the guidelines, it's not a statute, I want to be clear. A little later, they say that euthanasia is the safest course of action when such animals bite humans. And as the owner of 8 wolf dogs, that terrifies me. So I would like to, if you folks are willing, I would like to proactively go after this guideline in the state of Virginia, and it's not necessarily a legal battle, but it would involve all of the same knowledge and strategy that you used in Massachusetts, because there is no differentiation between wolf-dog to wolf-dog pairing. I have one here that I have 7 generations on. There's no differentiation in the guideline between a first-generation hybrid cross and a 7th-generation wolf-dog. And I think, I would hope, at a minimum, we could at least get clarification on the wild and domestic mating being called a hybrid and everything else being called a dog. Do you have any thoughts on that? Are you willing to entertain that?
Well, Jeremy, I think that's directed to you and Joe. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Directed to the lawyers, not to George.
I'll take it first. This is Jeremy, and then I'll let Joe finish up. So the thing about Virginia is they seem very focused on making sure, right, that you have a permit and that you know how to contain these animals. So unlike many states,
correction.
Virginia,
Let me step in. I'm sorry. Let me step in. There are only a couple of places in Virginia that have permits. Virginia is not a permit state, and it's only the densely populated, like Richmond, Virginia, that requires a permit. So I'm not in an area that requires a permit.
Okay. But they also, instead of it being the state law, it looks like they do leave it up to the different localities. So that explains why you could have one in one part of the state but not another. And
Correct.
one thing we have to do is, as lawyers, one thing, in order to challenge these things, we have to have a case to bring forward. It's called, is it right to have a dispute on? So to preventively challenge a statute, that's certainly an option. That tends to, I think, deal more with lobbyists and find out who were the legislative folks who put this together. It's certainly easier to get the attention of a court who has the authority to at least reinterpret the statute if you have an actual case to bring forward. And Joe, wondering if you feel differently about how to proactively challenge these without actually having a client or a case.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to comment about Virginia in particular because I just haven't given it any thought. My practice is not one that focuses exclusively on these types of animal issues. To the extent that I've been involved in them, by and large, they've been with Jeremy. So in that regard, I would defer to him as to whether or not ultimately I would get involved in something. And typically I handle the legal issues, that kind of thing. So I would defer to you, Jeremy.
Well, the great thing is, while neither of us are licensed to practice in Virginia, I do believe we have an affiliate in Virginia who I'm happy to connect you with, John, because what you're doing
yes, sir. I would
really
appreciate
important.
that, but Jeremy, I would want you to ride herd on this. You have the knowledge that no other attorney is going to have right now, and the nuances of what's really a hybrid versus what's a dog. And I do believe that you're on the right track there with how many generations away from wild. But if you're not interested, I'll go it alone. If you are interested,
No.
I want you to steer it.
I'm certainly interested, and if I can find a way to ethically assist you, and it could be by working through another attorney who's licensed in Virginia, I'm all for it. Perhaps we can talk offline, or maybe
Sounds good.
George might have your information, or you can reach me through Facebook at Boston Dog or by calling at 844-DOG ATTY, 844-DOG ATTY. Just call me and we'll set up time to talk, John. Thank you.
All right, excellent. I will contact you. I just wanted to hear that you would be willing to jump on this. Okay, thank you.
This is Ted. Could I say something?
Please, Ted, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first of all, that word hybrid is misused because hybrid means is a cross between animals of two different species. So breeding a wolf to a dog is not a hybrid because they're the same species. So
correct.
I agree with you there, sir. I think that it could be shot down. I think that the whole thing is just unscientifically put together. But a layman can't do that on his own.
I don't like that word wolfdog, and neither does Ray Perotti. I mean, it makes you think that what you have is a cross between a wild wolf and a dog, and there's nobody who's going to be able to go out and get a wild wolf and breed it to a dog. How's anybody going to do that? Maybe the Bronx.
I understand. I completely understand that, and I believe that's where the rabies issue comes into play. That's what people were concerned about.
I asked Ray Perotti that point blank. I said, the rabies work on wolf dogs or wolves? He says, yes, they do.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, John. Any more questions for the panel?
No, that was it. That's my burning question. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and grab got a couple of questions that just came in. I'm going to go ahead and sign off with you now, John. Thank you so much for calling, and make sure if you didn't write down Jeremy's number, I'll make sure and get it to you. Okay.
I have it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. So let's see, Jeremy, Ted, and Joe. We still got you on there. So I got a question that just came in from Michigan about the Michigan Wolfdog Law. And it looks like I guess they're asking for some clarification on it. Let me see if I can figure out what they want to know here. This might be a little bit too detailed for us to go into, guys, because I don't have it set up. Like I said, I think what I'll do is I'm going to set up a couple more opportunities for us to talk because I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to have a lot of questions about wolf dogs and the legalities of it. So, callers, if anybody, go ahead, Jeremy.
Well, I can say one thing. Looking at the statute right here, is it looks somewhat similar to Massachusetts, although it seems like there's greater permissions there. But certainly, if that's something the person had questioned about the statute, we would have to locate a Michigan attorney to really interpret it and look at the case law in Michigan. But it looks like it's a little more forgiving than they were here in Massachusetts.
Well, and interestingly enough, wolf dogs are illegal in Michigan, so it'll be an interesting thing. So you've got the Michigan piece here. So okay, well, what I think we need to do is a couple of things, Jeremy. It looks like you might have to get a whole bunch of referrals going on with some attorneys across the country when it comes to wolf dogs. So what I'd like to do, let me give the listeners, if anybody has a question they'd like to call in and ask our panel, or if they want to just talk about what happened to Ted, you can reach us at 845-241-9906. That's 845-241-9906. This is Expedition Wolfdog, and you're talking with Jeremy Cohen, Joe Griffin, and Ted Anderson about the case that Mr. Anderson went through. So, Ted, I kind of want to refer back to you. I want to make it a little personal. What did it feel like when these people said, these authorities, if you will, said, we want to take your dogs? What did that make you feel like?
Desperate.
Really?
I live by myself. I mean, I've been married twice, but right now I live by myself, so these dogs are really my companions, and I felt violated on a couple of levels. The first level was this guy French and this environmental cop Raymer coming to my house when I'm not there, multiple times, and I think that's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Is that the right amendment? Fourth Amendment? I keep forgetting. Search and seizure and
right.
Because if they come to my house,
they basically trespassed, right? They trespassed on your property. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, that's what it sounds like.
Well, I'm not here, and they're looking at the dogs. To me, that's an illegal search. They're looking for the dogs and taking notes and writing stuff down. probably taken photographs. To me, that my interpretation of that is illegal search. So that's a feeling of violation right there. And then taking the dogs and seizing and euthanizing dogs, to me, is just downright evil to begin with. And for the state to do something like that makes it even worse. And then there's emotional attachment you have with the dogs. You're losing that. So there's three levels there. Actually, there's the violation of your constitutional rights, number one. Number two, there's the violation of the dogs being your companions and them being taken away from you. And the third is just seizing, and probably they were going to euthanize them. I don't know what else they were going to do with them. And so that is a stress. And what they would do with them, from what I understand, they would put them at least in small kennels. I have a huge kennel. I have the biggest dog kennel I've ever seen. And they're quite happy with me. So I know they would be miserable and freak out in some small cages, especially if they were separated.
Sure. So, Ted, what would you do? What would you suggest to our listeners if they were in a similar situation? What would be the action steps, if you will, that people should do if they find themselves in a similar situation as yours?
Well, I mean, I guess maybe the state of Massachusetts is kind of lucky that they have an attorney like Jeremy who's in the business of protecting pets, you know. And so you need that legal footing right there. So I got that. I just did a quick Google search, and they came across Jeremy because he lost his dog over there. So I had that, the legal grounds, and then you want to get a good scientific footing. And that's where Dr. Prati comes in. And Professor Prati, by the way, he will, if you pay his airfare and hotel, he will go anywhere to protect your dogs. And he could argue it from a scientific point of view. And he's got a lot of stature, and he's got the publications to prove it. Prince didn't have any publications on canines. Ray Prati's got probably 100 publications on canines, plus he wrote 2 books. He's got one out that came out like a year ago about the evolution of called The Evolution of Dogs and or Wolves and People. And so I was on a strong biological footing and a legal footing. If you could get that, but don't try to do anything yourself, because you're going to get beat up if you do.
All right, that's where I was going. So I got a question that just came in, and Jeremy or Joe, that maybe you can help us on this. So you've heard me say this before, Jeremy, in our conversations, but someone is asking for your opinion of U.S. Code Title IX CFR 1.1, and that is the title that basically states that a cross between a wolf and a dog is a domestic dog. Do you have anything you could share with us about that?
Well, I know that, let me just correct something about Michigan. I'd say it's more forgiving. They don't allow them, but I think there's more room to play with the wording they use, in the sense of calling them Wolfdog crosses. I know litigation has been brought in Michigan before, but that just sounds even more ripe for a challenge, just the phrasing that they use in terms of crosses. As far as 9 CFR, Ted talks about we were on good legal footing and good biological footing, because we had to have a plan B if we didn't win on the legal. And we really relied on 9 CFR. I mean, that definition is just so helpful to us, that crosses between wild animal species and domestic animals, such as dogs and wolves, are considered domestic animals. And they give the other example of a buffalo and a domestic cattle. But still, the states are sovereign, and that wording doesn't necessarily help in Massachusetts, but it certainly has some sway. I think so. It's definitely helpful, but the problem is getting the courts in each state to look at the 9 CFR 1.1 with authority.
Right, and that would be through an actual case that's in front of a judge, right? You can't just say, hey, here we are, we have this great idea, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't work that way, does it?
Right. You can't just say, I'm keeping this dog because of 9 CFR 1.1, and it doesn't supersede state law, but it does offer some authority for a judge to consider.
Okay. So, Jeremy, what's a recipe for success for a Wolfdog owner that finds themselves in legal trouble in their own state? And again, I know you can't speak to the different states, but if you were to give a piece of advice, you and Joe were to give a piece of advice to a potential Wolfdog owner, similar to what Ted did, what do you think that they should do if they're faced with a similar situation where where an authority is talking about taking their animals away because they say they're illegal?
Well, I'll answer, and then I want to leave a bit of time for Joe. The fundamental thing here is, are you a responsible pet owner? And for something like a wolf dog or wolf hybrid, I would look at Ted as an example. Do you have the proper containment? How are you dealing with the vaccinations? Because we know that's extremely important. Do you understand the breed? And do you understand where you got the breed? So first, I need to prove that you're a responsible pet owner and that you understand that this is a dog that needs a different type of environment. And it's not a dog for an apartment in the city. And so before I would even take a case, I'm going to interview the client to say, do you have this other stuff in place already? Because we can build off of that. And Ted happened to have that in place. And the second thing is, do not be intimidated. There are two sides to every argument, and I know this, if guys like Joe and I, and I'm certain there's other lawyers out there, if you get an argument and you believe in it, it makes it very easy to sell it. And we really believe in the legal argument and the biological argument here. So do not back down. We don't like bullies, and don't let these bullies take your pets away without a fight. Joe, why don't you jump in on if you have something?
Yeah, I mean, my observations, just from dealing with Ted's case is that, we did have, in terms of the litigation strategy or the approach, was this idea of really dealing with it on two fronts. One was really taking a hard look at the statute and deciding whether or not, which we ultimately did, there was a basis to attack the statute. And without having done a survey of all of the related statutes throughout the United States, it seems like, just based on the input we've been getting tonight, that there's a lot of ambiguity out there in these statutes. And it's one of those things, by its very nature, it sort of lends itself to this potential argument. So that's number one. And then the rest of it, the second part of it is this, what we've, I think, come to call during this show, this biological part of it. And that would manifest itself in the form of a trial, whether it's a jury trial or a bench trial. And while we were prepared to do that, that's a dicier proposition than setting forth a legal argument that says, here's case law that demonstrates to you, Judge, that this statute is incomprehensible, doesn't tell us what we're supposed to do, and doesn't define the things that we're not supposed to do. That's much better, I think, than arguing a case in front of a jury, in front of jurors that you don't know who they are or what they think, who are going to hear Wolfdog, and are not necessarily maybe going to, identify with your client. So,
understood.
It's really begins with looking at the statute, and then, there's other resources out there vis-a-vis Ray that can help you with the biological end of things.
Fantastic. Well, guys, we're down to the last 50 seconds of the show. It was very fast. I really want to thank all three of you for coming on and sharing this story, and I hope to have some of you back. I know that your time's very valuable. I'm going to work something out with Jeremy, and maybe if we can get you guys back on, we can have some more discussions. I just want to say thank you so much for the time, Ted, and I'm sorry you went through what you did. I'm glad that you won. And Jeremy, thank you so much for standing up for animal owners, because there's not a lot of people that do it for us. And Joe, you're just a big part. When you start talking about criminal law, we don't know a whole lot. So I just want to say thank you so much to everybody listening to Expedition Wolfdog tonight, and we'll see you next week on Expedition Wolfdog.